A stone's throw away from the Hamilton exit in Spokane, there is what appears to be the remains of a medieval castle. In actuality, it's a 100-year-old artifact from what was once described as a world-class park. It was crafted by some of the most prominent landscape architects in America, and at its center was a prehistoric crater. At its prime, it was frequented by thousands. But unfortunately, as one Spokane Daily Chronicle writer put it, Liberty Park was destined for ill fate. The story of Liberty Park begins in 1897, when a millionaire champion yachtsman donated 21 acres to the city between 3rd and 5th Avenue. F. Lewis Clark was an entrepreneur and a personal friend of Kaiser Wilhelm II. He was a savvy businessman and knew that having a park nearby would increase the real estate values of his other properties. Its unique amphitheater shape also made it nearly impossible to build on.
Most of the park was actually either underwater or swampland or high cliffs. Not really optimal for housing.
Some saw the land as an opportunity to construct a premier park to rub in the face of other cities. In 1898, the Spokane Chronicle interviewed Spokane's mayor about the park.
Its natural beauty is remarkable. The people of Chicago and St. Louis would give millions for it, but they can't get it, for art cannot make such things.
Over the next few years, Liberty Park's landscape gardener, J.D. Lloyd, oversaw the grading of roads, the planting of trees, and the construction of walkways. One of the largest challenges in building the park proved to be the triangular body of water in its center. Sometimes referred to as Donner's Pond or Springfield Lake, it needed to be drained and scraped out before being suitable for recreational use. When an engineer dropped his plumb line in its center, he made a startling discovery. The so-called pond was over 40 feet deep at one point, causing a ferocious debate among local geologists over the origin of the mystery crater. Those who were convinced it was an extinct volcano had a plan to turn it into a tourist attraction in which you could drive your car into the center of the crater. Ironically, a century later, hundreds of motorists do in fact drive through the flattened out crater every day in the area that is now 3rd Avenue. In January of 1900, the initial work on the lake was complete, and the park opened up for ice skating. Liberty soon became one of the premier winter destinations in Spokane. In 1908, the Massachusetts-based Olmsted Brothers Company, one of the top landscape design firms in the country, was commissioned for the Spokane Park system. John Charles Olmsted, whose uncle/father designed Central Park, visited Liberty and suggested numerous improvements, one of which was to gear the park more towards young kids, despite the sheer cliffs and drowning hazards. Nevertheless, the city soon added wading pools, swing sets, and sandboxes. This would become Spokane's first public playground. The next year, on the front page of the Spokane Daily Chronicle, in an article entitled "Paradise for Tiny Tots," Aubrey L. White, the father of the Spokane Parks Department, invited the city's women to drop their young children off at Liberty before they went downtown to shop. The Parks Commission had hired a, quote, competent and reliable woman to watch after them in daytime hours. She was also given the authority to bathe them.
In one of the houses where the park caretaker will live, we will fit up shower baths where the children after their games will be permitted to take shower baths.
Using a combination of basaltic lava rock and lumber, the Parks Department added a promenade, a pavilion, and numerous rustic stairways, pictures of which would often appear in local postcards. In 1920, one of the first public pools in Spokane opened up at Liberty. It was immensely popular, and in 1932, over 2,000 spectators gathered to watch the city swim championships. In the mid-30s, a Civilian Works Administration crew began digging through the giant rock separating the two halves of the park. To make Liberty more accessible, they planned to make a hole large enough for an automobile to drive through. But when crews discovered how hard and flinty the rock was, they decided to make the cave much smaller. The first 4 decades of Liberty Park were undoubtedly its finest. It offered a combination of natural and man-made wonders that made it distinct from any other urban park in the Northwest. But in the following decades, there would rarely be a positive story about Liberty Park published.
It started its decline probably right before the Great Depression and never really recovered.
In 1937, laundry workers on strike beat a Davenport truck driver nearly to death. They stole his milk truck, drove it to the top of Liberty Park, and pushed it off the cliff into the lake, which at that time had become more of a swamp.
It was a mosquito breeding place by that time, and it wasn't really an aesthetic-looking pond. It was kind of an eyesore.
After years of complaints, the city finally decided to fill it in 1949. Businesses from all over the county were invited to dump non-burnable waste into the crater, including truckloads of ash from the crematorium department. The initial plan was to build a big playfield athletic arena over top, but that plan was shelved a few years later when the transportation department announced the 4 proposed freeway routes. Route A, which cut straight through Liberty Park, was eventually chosen, which meant that the non-burnable waste that had only recently been added now had to be dug up to make room for the freeway. At a city council meeting in 1960, advocates for Deaconess labeled the chosen freeway route the kiss of death for both Liberty Park and the hospital. Though Deaconess survived, Liberty Park did not. 18 acres were sold to the transportation department, leaving only 2 left.
And what was kept down there was a swimming pool, and that was basically it. But the swimming pool was an old pool anyway, and it finally just wore out.
By then, most of the park was already overgrown with brush and in disrepair, and the wood structures had rotted away. However, there were still some that held out hope for exploring the mystery crater. In 1957, one citizen wrote a letter to the editor of the Spokane Review on the possibility of excavation.
This park should be called Spokane Crater Park. There's a certainty of finding bones of prehistoric animals, mastodon and others. We have a gold mine, if only we have the genius to develop it.
By 1960, a less divisive theory on the crater had developed. Scientists speculated that during the Great Floods, part of the Spokane River had broken off, careened over the cliff in a waterfall, creating the crater below. While the freeway was being built, the transportation department donated funds to expand Liberty's eastern side to where it is today. Though it's still called Liberty Park, it bears little resemblance to the original.
I don't think the neighborhood ever felt it was a fair trade-off, but again, the neighborhood really had no say in it.
By 1971, the cave had been filled in, the high cliff had been blasted in half to make room for 3rd Avenue, and the freeway was finally completed after 14 years of construction. Today, the only thing left behind are the crumbling ruins of the promenade and a few basaltic stairways, some more hidden than others. The park now borders on an office depot and a used car lot. There are no historical markers on the property, just a few no camping signs and a lot of garbage.
It was this park's time to go. That's all. It served its purpose, and it was becoming lesser and lesser used. The location of Liberty Park led to its demise. The easiest, most economical way to go from the east to the west is Spokane.
Liberty Park's lasting legacy is confusion. Shortly after the rock tunnel was completed, historians and writers began confusing it for a natural phenomenon. The crater confused geologists for decades before it was forgotten about. And today, residents walking their dogs are confused by the presence of 3 tires lodged in the middle of 2 fully grown trees near the cliffside, perhaps placed there by neighborhood children from decades previous. But none of that compares to the amount of confusion caused to thousands of commuters driving west on I-90 every year.
It's just a real curiosity. What are these things represent?
I continually am asked from people, what are those rocks down there for?
What did these used to look like, and what were they? And it's one of Spokane's minor attractions, I would say.